The primary visual cortex, V1, Part 4, Contextual Inferences on V1 Neural Responses. So far, we have focused on classical residual fields, and this is an example schematic. This dashed circle marks the location and spatial extent of the residual field for a neuron, and the bar inside has the preferred orientation of this neuron. And let's say that the neuron responds to this preferred stimulus with a response level normalized to 1. If nothing is within the residual field, then the response from the same neuron should be 0. It would not make a difference whether the surrounding bars outside the residual field are present or not. This is expected from the definition of the residual field. However, if the optimally oriented bar is now added into the residual field, the response is reduced from that when there is no contextual bars outside the residual field. It is often reduced by more than 50%, not a negligible amount. But if the contextual bars outside the residual field is randomly oriented, the response is also reduced, but typically not as much. When the contextual bars are orthogonal to the bar within the residual field, the response is typically least suppressed. Such suppression to neural responses by visual inputs outside the residual field is called surround suppression or contextual suppression. Because by definition, visual inputs outside the classical residual field should not affect neural responses, these regions are called the extra-classical residual field. The suppression depends on the features of the contextual inputs, so that the suppression is strongest when the contextual input have the same orientation as the visual input within the classical residual field, and the suppression is weakest when the contextual inputs are orthogonal to the visual input within the classical residual field, and the randomly oriented inputs are in between these two extremes. These are called general or feature unspecific surround suppression. If we denote the energy model's response to this complex cell as EI, and that from a neighboring complex cell to contextual inputs as EJ, then the response to the central complex cell can be modeled as OI, like this. And this models the general feature unspecific suppression between neighboring complex cells. In contrast, these are feature-specific surround suppressions. Some contextual inputs can increase a neuron's response, and this is an example of collinear facilitation. The contextual bars outside the classical residual field are aligned with the bar inside as if they are all part of a long line. This makes the neural response higher than the case without the contextual bars, and this is mostly when the bar inside the residual field is weak in input contrast, so that by itself alone, it does not excite the neuron strongly. Contextual inferences are likely caused by interactions between neighboring V1 neurons. Here is an image to visualize a surface segment of V1. Since this is 500 microns, so this area is slightly less than 3 by 3 millimeters. The red-colored patches visualize local clusters of neurons tuned to horizontal orientation. The blue-colored patches visualize local clusters of neurons tuned to vertical orientation. These black traces visualize the neural axon terminals originated from neurons in this patch, visualized in a blue-colored patch. This means that neurons in this blue patch interact with neurons up to 2 or 3 millimeters away. So there is a recurrent neural circuit between neighboring V1 neurons. These neurons have their residual fields near each other. Some are not even overlapping with each other. Such neural connections can mediate the contextual inferences observed physiologically. These interacting patches are roughly all colored blue, indicating that the underlying V1 neurons that are interacting with each other prefer orientations equal to or close to vertical. This could be the basis why contextual suppression is strongest when the contextual bars have the same orientation as the central bar. V1 also receives feedback from downstream visual areas such as V2, V3, and V4, so therefore feedback from higher visual areas are also argued to cause contextual inferences. So how much do mechanisms from within V1 or beyond V1 contribute to the contextual inferences are still being studied. Contextual inferences are nuisances to the framework relying on the classical rested field. And so Chapter 5 of the book will show that these are not nuisances anymore when V1 is understood to play a critical role in vision, namely to compute a saliency map to guide visual attention exogenously.